Can you give Sarah access? And I know we've got a little background noise today.
I'm also happy, Lisa, if you want me to email you my slides or.
You know what? I might have them. Hold on. Let's take it off. I bet I have your slides. I've got them from Kimber. Welcome back, everybody. We're just getting organized. Sorry for the technical challenges. The state of Michigan's keeping us on our toes. Yes, I have your slides. Let me.
Who regulates telecom anyway?
I don't know. Now we're going to test Lisa's skills as to how to get all of this working. And I see that we have people that keep joining us by phone and keep getting kicked out, which is not a good thing. Hopefully we're getting our phone joiners back. Like Tanya Sweener just left again. And I know Roman had to leave at some point, but I can see people are coming and going. Okay, I can share the slides. I think I know how to do this.
Great.
All right.
Thank you very much.
And we were here?
We were here, yeah. So effectively, as I was said at the beginning, all of this stuff is largely publicly available. The questionnaire itself, all of the exact questions that we asked, data tables for each question broken down. There's that small inset includes one example of the data tables. It breaks every question down by responses based on region of the state, jurisdiction's population size, and jurisdiction type, whether it's the city, village, township, county. They're all available online. There's also 2 publicly accessible reports. The snapshot of one is here that was sent out. This one was on intergovernmental collaboration. That went out last week, and everything else that was in the survey was released today. So those are up on the website as well, and accessible, I think, also through Eagle's website. And then we also had 2 internal white papers that were part of this to give breakdowns specifically on some groups that the Energy Office often does outreach to. So folks in the UP, in part to like make sure that we, had, if there was anything interesting to share with you all, low income communities or those that are in facing coal plant closures, and also MGC is the Michigan Green Communities Program. So this is kind of communities that have done a number of things towards sustainability. And so we have, again, analysis on each of those for each of those groups. And then we also looked at some past data from MPPS, is the Michigan Public Policy Survey, which this survey that we did was a special wave of the Michigan Public Policy Survey. It's a survey that goes to these same respondents every year for the past 10 years. It's just this year it was all about energy. We effectively looked at old data on things including environmental attitudes, but also staff capacity. So, and I bring that up because there's a couple of slides included in here that are from some of that past data. Next slide, Lisa, which is effectively just saying what I'm going to show you are the key findings from the energy survey. But again, this is only top level. So one of the first questions that we asked every local official in the state is, every local government official in the state is, how relevant are the following issues for your jurisdiction's government? And the key to most of these things is that blue is good. So pay attention to blue, go blue. I know. sometimes
And
green is good.
Sarah.
Um, uh, so, here is regulating placement of energy infrastructure on private property. And so over half of local officials, local governments in the state say that this is at least somewhat relevant for their local jurisdiction to be doing. That is effectively planning and zoning. There is also, over half of local governments in the state say that it's relevant for them to be helping improve energy efficiency for local businesses or residents. There's less folks who think that planning for EV infrastructure is a relevant thing for their local government to be doing, or reducing their jurisdiction government's use of fossil fuels. So that's statewide numbers. And if you go to the next slide.
Hey, I'm just gonna look to see if somebody could mute, that'd be great. I'm not sure where we're getting all the feedback from. So if you have muted, please mute. This is the very same data, or this is the very same question, but it's just specifically for respondents who are in the Upper Peninsula. And so one of the key takeaways here is that, generally speaking, what folks in the UP think is similar to how local officials in the UP feel is similar to downstate as well. Each issue on the relevance of these energy topics is slightly, local officials in the UP think it's slightly less relevant, but there's still almost half who say energy efficiency and placement of energy infrastructure is a relevant thing for their local government to be talking about and dealing with. If you go to the next slide, please. The next set of questions that we asked was about how much they've done. If these things are relevant, like how much have they actually done so far on energy planning or policy making? And we see this as a continuum of, you've talked about it, you've considered it, you've actually developed policies or practices related to clean energy, or you've implemented it. And you can kind of see that there's more extensive consideration than actual implementation, which is what you would expect. And if you go to the next slide, please. You'll see in the UP, though, there's less extensive consideration. So it's only 5% of jurisdictions that say, like, they've extensively considered any of those clean energy topics within their local government. And there's a lot more local governments that say they've not at all implemented policies.
Was there a breakdown as far as these questions go? Because I mean, if they're within all of those topics, was there a breakdown per specific, like saying energy efficiency versus clean energy?
So effectively, we use this as the skip pattern. If you told us that you haven't done anything at all, we skipped you out of a whole bunch of things to deep dive into each of those topics. And so there's subsequent sets of questions, we call them batteries, about each of those topics on the survey. And I'll dive into a lot of them going forward, but not, again, there's more than I could possibly present today. So EVs, for example, like what local governments are doing with respect to EVs, like, do they have chargers? Do they say they have chargers on public property in their community? Do they think they have enough EV chargers? Like, we have all of that data, it's just not here. And so.
Perfect.
Great. The next slide is among people who on that previous slide told us that they've not even considered policies. We asked them what the barriers are to developing energy, to talking about energy. And you can see, here's where dark green is what you want to pay attention to. That, the most common response, like the biggest barrier, is that they have a lack of expertise. And this is a statewide number. They also say the cost of developing policies or practices related to energy is a significant barrier for them tackling this. If you go to the next slide, Lisa. In the UP, it's really not, over on the left-hand side, a lack of interest among residents or local officials. Even more so, they highlight a lack of expertise and the cost of development. And if you go to the next slide, one of the reasons that you'll see governments say they have a staff member or they have a consultant who at least partially, like some of their time is spent on energy issues. Most commonly, you can see, but 6% say they use an external organization or kind of consultant. Only 2% of local governments in the UP say they have a staff member whose sole responsibility is on energy. It's the numbers of jurisdictions in the UP that have somebody on staff to focus on energy is lower than statewide, but even statewide, it's only 19% of local governments who have anybody that, that's really focused on energy. But this idea of a lack of staff capacity carries over beyond energy. So this is going back to where I said we mined some of our past survey data. In the UP, 25% of jurisdictions, I'm reading this from the bottom corner, 25% of jurisdictions who have zoning authority. So not all jurisdictions are responsible for zoning, but among those who do have zoning authority in the UP say they have no planning staff and they don't regularly use external consultants. And that number is significantly higher than the rest of the state. And so, I mean, these are, tend to have very lean staffs by comparison. If you go to the next slide, we asked effectively, what kind of resources is your jurisdiction looking for? Specifically, this one is specifically for planning and zoning, because that's the thing that most local governments in the Upper Peninsula said that they had some kind of, that was something that was within their realm of, they believed it was relevant. But the numbers are similar. The kind of resources that they're looking for are similar for other topics that we asked about. And this is actually very similar for the rest of the state. So they want samples, right? Give us an example of what this might look like. How do we address zoning for energy, or zoning for solar, or zoning for wind? Templates, workshops, or training. And I mean, funding is important, like matching funding is important, but it wasn't necessarily the number one. If you can go to the next slide, please. The getting into like who's done what, the question that was asked before. So this is an example of some of the detail that we got into further on. So we asked about whether they had conducted energy audits on a range of municipal buildings. And in the UP, 40% of jurisdictions have had, or statewide, 40% of jurisdictions have had an energy audit on some type of public facility. Not all jurisdictions have all of these types of facilities, so that's why the bars are significantly shorter. That's what we're not showing here is the not applicable. If you go to the next slide, this is that same data, but for the UP. So energy audits are, at least as reported from local officials, are less common in the UP, and particularly for like the township hall or county administration building, that's less common there than it is in the rest of the state. But you can see kind of the balance of, those that have these types of facilities, which have conducted energy audits and which haven't. On the next slide, again, this is the kind of data that's in here. We asked why not? If you haven't conducted any energy audits, why haven't you? And most common response in the UP is that it's just not a priority, but there's also, they're pointing to insufficient funding to conduct audits, insufficient information about like where to start. And if they do have an audit, like concern over funding that they'd be able to act. On the next, kind of moving to another topic, again, this survey covered lots of different aspects of energy, community energy management. We asked about enforcing energy codes. And you can hear on the same slide, we have the statewide and UP numbers. So the question is, do the building inspectors in your jurisdiction struggle to enforce current energy codes? So I guess here you don't want people to be blue. You don't want them to strongly agree. Green is good here. And, across the board, well, most of the time, the township supervisor, the mayor didn't know. So this is a pretty big, don't know response. But one of the things that's notable is that there is a statistically significant difference. Those in the UP do agree more often that the inspectors struggle to enforce the current energy code. And here are just some of the quotes. We also asked an open-ended question to describe, their response, and they said some of them are codes are too complex and don't always apply to the types of construction within our community, or we have one building inspector that's shared amongst multiple counties. And so we have different kind of fuel mixes. So again, there's a lot of open-ended responses here too that can be mined to help point to, what it is that local officials are looking for and struggling with. For what it's worth, we also asked local officials about their interest in strengthening the code, and there are I don't know, it was close to over 100 jurisdictions that said they do think the state energy code should be strengthened, but others say, the majority response was it should stay where it is. But this is one where, the responses of the Michigan Green Communities members who are doing a lot of things on sustainability were outliers on that question, for example. If you go to the next slide, I said last week we came out with a report on intergovernmental cooperation on a range of sustainability issues. And so in blue here, these are the jurisdictions who say they currently collaborate with other local governments on each of these issues. But you can see that there's a whole bunch in light green who don't currently collaborate, but who say that they are interested in collaborating. And it's across a range of issues. If you go to the next slide, what I wanted to highlight is because we have such high response rates, we're able to, without jeopardizing respondent confidentiality, provide county level data. So this is only showing the jurisdictions who don't currently collaborate, but who say they are interested in collaborating, the percentage of those jurisdictions within each county that responded that they're interested in collaboration. So you would imagine that a lot of this collaboration would happen at the county level. And so you can enable you to kind of highlight or pinpoint where communities are really interested in collaborating. It looks like there's a hand up.
Yeah, thanks. It's Jen Hill and Marquette, and I've been having a lot of connection issues, but I just wanted to say that I don't know where this survey happened in relation to coronavirus, but we now have all of our city township leadership meeting weekly because of coronavirus, and there's an opportunity there.
Great. Yeah, the fact that people are gathering, yeah, that's great. I think this, when everything shut down, I skimmed over the fact that we actually launched this survey a year ago today. It was in the field for 8 weeks. So we actually had, early data at the end of December. We were getting ready to release reports, and then coronavirus hit and local governments were occupied with lots of other things. So we effectively held those reports until now. Not that local governments are not occupied with other things, but we didn't want the data to get too old. So the data itself is from last year, based on some other surveys, stuff that we, all of the other surveys that we do. There are certainly some things that change quickly, but our sense is that much of this wouldn't have yet. If you go to the next slide, Liesl, this is again mining old data that we have. In spring of 2019, we asked a question about how much do you trust each of the following groups as a source of information on energy issues. And I've only showed the responses for very much and somewhat, but you can kind of see who are trusted sources of information. So the local government, specifically about energy, local government associations, the Michigan Townships Association, Michigan Municipal League, Michigan Association of Counties are the sources that the township and city and village and county officials trust to get information from, which is not surprising. This is among the reasons that we partner with them, because we know that they're trusted sources of information. This data is specific to the UP, but is similar to the southern half of the state. The electric utility is also a trusted partner. The energy office, which I commend Eagle for being okay with us asking. Sometimes you don't put questions on that you don't want to hear the answer to, but Energy Office is actually the third most trusted partner, which is really great, ahead of, as you'll see, colleges and universities. But something to note is that energy contractors and nonprofits actually among local officials rate lower, in part because we think they're seen as, pushing either their service or kind of their agenda. And so this is really important to us. This is, I think, helps us as we figure out who to involve in the advisory group and to partner with to get information out about webinars. So we've been giving information on planning and zoning through the Michigan Townships Association, as an example. The next slide, this is about the last slide was about messengers. This one is about what is the message. And this is data that was also asked. Some of it is from this new survey, some of it is from the previous survey. But on the left, we asked a agree, disagree statement about promoting environmental sustainability being an important aspect of local government leadership. And you can see in blue that the majority of local officials, whether statewide or in the UP, agree with this. And you can, if you note, like the number of those in the UP that strongly agree is higher than that statewide. It's not statistically significant, but even so, you can say, a quarter of local officials in the UP strongly agree that promoting environmental sustainability is important. When we ask questions about climate, though, you can see over on the right-hand side that there's slight decrease in the darker blue color, but what really is notable is the big increase in the dark green that effectively say like climate change isn't a problem at all. And so this suggests, again, like pushing in, like talking about clean energy from an environmental perspective really fits in the UP. Perhaps, I mean, we know this, right? It's like sometimes the talking about climate change can be polarizing, and maybe lose more people. So
Sarah, can you talk about the timing of this data? Like was this last year, end of last year?
This was the end of last year. There was also data from 2008. And we had a data point from, I think it was 2013 or 14. We also, at U of M, we also run a nationwide climate survey and find that like attitudes about climate change now are similar to they were at the beginning of like 2008 period before things got really polarized. And effectively what we found in Michigan largely follows that. So it could certainly have changed over the last 12 months. That's possible. But as of last fall, this is data from then. All right, the next slide shows what our statewide takeaways were. So, this is University of Michigan looking at the data that we got back and saying to Eagle, like, how we see this data shaking out is really you need to meet communities where they are. That not all communities in the state are in the same place with regards to thinking about energy. That there are kind of leading communities who are, appropriate for kind of like the catalyst communities. They're really interested in talking about climate action. There's folks in the middle who may be interested in addressing clean energy, but don't have the resources really to do so. They don't have staff, or they'll tell us, there's knowledge gaps. And then there are those who are uninterested, really. They don't think that clean energy is something that's relevant for their jurisdiction to be addressing. My sense, because a lot of my work is on, utility scale renewables in rural communities, those are actually the places that are often getting approached to host these energy projects. And so, I mean, a lot of what I do is speaking to them about like the energy landscape is changing and you should be aware of that. So, but effectively, like the survey finds, like different communities are at different spots. That there's really, another finding is that there's really an opportunity for some peer-to-peer sharing to convey, like, this is what, like, other communities have done this. Other communities have done energy audits, and demystify it for them. It's Michigan communities, not like nationwide examples, but we're talking about Michigan communities, particularly highlighting low-cost municipal actions. And so that's effectively the genesis of this community energy management webinar series that's launching, is allowing communities, small and large, to share their stories about how they did a range of energy management actions. Then the other thing that came out of this is that partnerships are key, right? Like that, finding who are the messengers that make sense to work with and partner with, because you know, you'll be able to multiply your effect when you have the people that are trusted giving information to local officials to act. And it needs to be multiple partners. It's not necessarily just one. And then I put this on here because I'm, based on the last conversation, I think that you know, EVs are within your scope, or things that you're talking about, and I didn't get into all of the details here, but there were over half of local officials effectively weren't able to answer the questions about how, like, EVs, what they're doing, whether it's relevant for them. There were a whole bunch of, like, we don't know if we have enough charging infrastructure. And so I think what we heard in open ends was that there's really a need for some education around, like, what is the future for electric vehicles? Like, should they be thinking about this? And that's, I know, something else, not necessarily within the work I'm doing, but that may be helpful for Eagle and other partners going forward.
Sarah, can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So you've given us an overview of the survey questions and what sort of answers. Were there any questions around energy costs? Obviously, one of the big things we've been dealing with as a task force is the cost of energy in the Upper Peninsula. And I'm just curious if there's any insight there at all.
There's nothing directly on the cost of energy. No, sorry.
I mean, obviously, a lot of these things indicate cost as you think about, you know, energy audits, efficiency work, and, you know, how do I save immediately on my own municipal facility building, or, you know, you can draw conclusions there, but I just wasn't sure if there's anything specific.
There wasn't on the cost of, like, the cost of electricity either to their local government or to, you know, to the residents throughout here, right? Like, the ability to address any of these things, like cost, was one of the key barriers for any of the things that that local governments may do. But also, like, efficiency and efficiency measures are the most common action that local governments have taken. I didn't include that in here. That was from some spring 2019 data that we have. But, you know, doing some energy efficiency improvements on municipal facilities, even if it's not the result of an energy audit, that is the most common thing that local officials have that say they've done with respect to energy. I have the next slide is specific takeaways regarding the UP, like, and the data from the UP. And this is just highlighting where technical assistance, you know, there's far fewer local government officials, you know, smaller staffs effectively in local governments in the UP. And so there's specific areas where there could be interest in some technical assistance. One is on community engagement, so getting the word out to residents about saving energy. That is something that local officials in the UP think is relevant for their jurisdiction. They just lack the technical, you know, the staff and the information to be able to do that. And also, again, on planning and zoning. I would highlight in the UP that there's lots of opportunity for intergovernmental cooperation. And so, you know, keeping on that, and then really messaging about environmental protection and economy. And this is kind of coming back to what, you know, you were just saying, Liesl, about the cost of electricity, right? But this is a great opportunity to save money, or, you know, depending on the scale of development. I mean, often when I'm talking to communities about big renewables projects, this is an opportunity for economic development. So that's something that message, I think, would work well in the UP. This is just one more time telling you there is so much more data in the survey on benchmarking and which governments are collecting energy use data and what they're doing with it or not doing with it. about which governments, how many governments have started to think about putting renewables on public lands. So whether on, whether that's rooftop solar or on wastewater treatment facilities, like we've got data on each of those topics, which say that they're interested in or exploring having their own municipal renewable energy goals, EV infrastructure needs and policy making. And I would just note that, first of all, the summary tables are available, but we can do specific analysis. County level analysis on any of these things. I just need to know what's of interest. So if there is something that would help the task force, just let me know. And then I just thought in the last couple of slides, I included some of the resources that we've developed for communities. They told us that they wanted some resources. And so this is the other things that we're doing through the grant, or some of the other things. So the first one right here is the zoning database. There honestly, 12 months ago, 15 months ago, there wasn't a good understanding of who was responsible for land use for zoning across the state of Michigan. And so we pulled this together to both understand who is responsible so we could outreach to communities. You don't want to talk about planning and zoning if that government is not responsible for it. But we also pulled together their existing zoning ordinances to figure out which have clean energy content. So on the next slide, we have the maps of who has wind and solar in their zoning ordinance. We also looked for any that are thinking about placement of EV charging infrastructure, and there's very few. But there are some that include EV infrastructure within their parking requirements, for example. But all of that's possible now because we have a database of these zoning ordinances. And the one thing to note, actually, if you go back up, Liesl, just a little bit, is you can go to the next one, that's fine. That's one. So in the UP, 57% of zoning ordinances include wind, which is not so bad. Actually, one of the questions that we asked on the survey was whether the jurisdiction thinks that their ordinance is encouraging or discouraging utility scale wind and solar development. There's some evidence statewide that ordinances are out of sync, that a lot of jurisdictions think that their ordinances, local officials tell us they think their ordinance is encouraging wind, but in fact, they have a height limit that will not get you a modern wind turbine. And we're digging in through some other research. We think that a lot of those ordinances were written in 2008 when turbines were a lot shorter. And so some of this is at re-education. This is pointing us towards re-educating communities that, like, hey, your ordinance may not be doing what you think it's doing. And so that's one of the things that we have been trying to communicate. But also that there are very few ordinances statewide, but specifically in the UP, that mention solar. Now, I know there's a lot of rooftop solar in the UP, and so probably it's just being interpreted as an accessory structure, which is possible, but there's a little bit of there's some risk associated with that. And the anecdote I give is in the city of Ann Arbor, that's how solar was interpreted until somebody proposed solar panels, ground-mounted solar panels in their front yard. And you can build an accessory structure in your front yard, but city council didn't want people to have solar panels in their front yard. And so those landowners were caught off guard because the zoning ordinance wasn't explicit. And so trying to encourage people to be explicit about, like, solar is, like, we're going to treat it as an accessory structure, and making sure that that's clear. And then just finally, on the last slide, I think it's the last slide, is some of the other resources to complement that. So we have a database of templates and guidance related to planning and zoning for wind and solar, and we're growing that this year. I'm coming up to speed on what local government should be doing on EVs, and like kind of whether we're to a point where we can think about how local government should be contemplating energy storage. We have some case studies and FAQs on specific projects, but also like just generally, like, what are the economic impacts of projects. If you are planning or zoning, there's an entire issue of planning and zoning news that we wrote that's on the state of renewables in Michigan and what local governments should be considering. And then maybe the next one is the final slide. I mentioned already that we have this webinar series. So we're talking about benchmarking and audits are the first two kind of peer-to-peer learning sessions. But next week we have helping local officials understand the code, the energy code adoption process. We're also integrating this work with other energy office grantees. So Rocky Mountain Institute is doing some training. Wupperter and the UP also has some guidance for local officials on including energy planning. And so that's something that we're trying to share with others throughout the state. And, you know, to the extent that we can, you know, like I said, the EV convenings is more like getting us up to speed so that we can figure out how to provide that information to local officials. So that's it. I think on the last slide, it's just my contact information. So, but you clearly know how to contact me too.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so I see a hand up from Jen. Is that residual, Jen, or do you have a new question?
Residual, sorry.
Okay. Discussion for Sarah. And I can unshare the slides so that we can all see each other. Stop sharing. And Sarah, while you were talking, I figured out how to make you a presenter.
Oh, well, we ran with it.
Yeah, we ran with it. And I'm just gonna, before we get going I'm just gonna apologize again. I'm guessing it's the state of Michigan that why everyone's been having trouble. So I'll apologize on behalf of all of us. Questions, discussion for Sarah.
This is Michael Larson. I guess in the UP, you know, we brought it up previously. Tony Ratasky had brought it up as well, saying that we've had a lot of pushback. We've had a lot of pushback on solar installations, you know, that have been going on. You know, in Escanaba Township, for example, is probably one of the latest ones, but we've also had it up in Lawrence with wind and so on and so forth. You know, what role in zoning? How can zoning help move those conversations forward prior to kind of getting to that point of public engagement where there's a lot of that pushback? You know, from your thoughts, from looking around the state, you know, what role in zoning can that play? Because I mean, it seems so. I'm on a local planning commission here, and sometimes, you know, of course, as you know, issues don't come up until there's actually a project at hand. So zoning kind of seems to take place in a vacuum sometimes, despite the need to, you know, publish what's kind of going on when that public hearing is going on. And maybe that's something that needs to be updated, because maybe newspapers aren't the way to publish that anymore. Maybe it needs to go in multiple ways. So anyway, I'm just wondering, from your point of view, what can be done on the zoning side to help avoid some of these conflicts?
So this is near and dear to my heart, which is how Lisa and I got to know each other. Right, this is not unique to the UP, right? My research and research from across the country effectively is about like being like proactive. It's hard to get public engagement early on, but I think one of the big challenges is when local officials, when local governments are trying to decide what the rules are at the same time that there's already a project that's proposed, right? Like the developers like have no choice, because so few communities have planned for solar, as you know, as an example. But really, planning is supposed to be proactive. You're supposed to think about how this fits with your long-term land use, economic development, you know, goals for your community. And so a lot of my work has been trying to convince communities that it is worthwhile to be proactive, and then have a rational discussion about how this fits. Have that public engagement before there's actually money on the table, right? You've got leaseholders, you know, who feel like they can't talk anymore because they have, you know, like they're seen as self-serving. And so have that discussion early. I've been showing them MISO-Q maps and effectively saying renewables are coming, like for better or for worse, encouraging them to think proactively. And my sense, and this is, for better or for worse, like this is just how Sarah operates. I help communities, I upset everybody because I talk to communities about the pros and cons and say like every energy source has both benefits and drawbacks. And my sense is that communities, like where we've seen some of the best communities that are happiest about renewable energy are that understand that going in, not like thinking that wind or solar is the greatest thing since sliced bread and realizing like, oh, wind turbines are not invisible, like, and so it's also, I think, one of the roles that I've been pushing for, and that I think, this is where a lot of these different organizations can play a part, is providing good information, because, these are complex issues, right? Like, and the City of Ann Arbor's Planning Commission meets once a week. Like, I mean, we have 3 public meetings a month. But many of these townships, like, their planning commissions meet, quarterly, right? So they're not like, just the volume of information is a lot. These are complex projects. And so a lot of that is, providing some, like, breaking that information down for communities. But I know that there's going to be some communities that, after hearing about the pros and cons, decide, like, this doesn't fit. But at least then there's some at least the developer knows and they can find a different place. So that's been our approach so far. And this map actually helps you see kind of where are those communities where, you can compare it to the place where, there's space on the grid, and be more proactive. Like, if they have zoning, but they have not contemplated wind or solar, like, rather than the developer finding that out, like, that's what I'm trying to do a little bit ahead of time. It's not a silver bullet, though, I should say. Like, it doesn't make it not contentious. I just think it first of all, it speeds up that process, in part because they don't have to figure out the zoning and then decide if the proposed project meets that zoning. They have already figured out the zoning, and so all they have to do is say, like, does this meet our expectations? So.
Yeah, and I'm just going to underscore Sarah's point that all energy sources have pros and cons, and so these conversations on the siting and zoning side are one component of it, but all energy sources have pros and cons.
Yeah. I mean, some of our other work, like, this is not the applied stuff, but just my research is trying to help put a number on, like, what impact, like, what one local government does, blocking a project has on other local governments, like on the cost of power. Like, that's something we can actually start to do that by having a zoning map where we know the places that have said no. Like, I'm working with an energy modeler here on campus to try to put that into play. And also looking beyond the state too, because this is not just a Michigan thing either. I mean, there's this is a newish land use for communities. They've not yet considered all of the, they've not considered all of the pros and cons. So.
Other questions for Sarah?
Ms. Jen, what about the idea, did you have a chance to tease into utility scale versus community scale versus even, like, on top of every school or on top of the fire departments and that kind of thing? That question of the 800-acre project versus the solar panels on every other roof on your block.
So, I mean, that's not in this survey. And I mean, this is what's really hard, right? Is that when you ask people how they feel about renewable energy in general, they love it. Like, everybody loves it until it's proposed in their neighborhood, right? And so I think there's so I have some ongoing research that's trying to understand, is there scale at play? There's very little information, actually. There's very little research on scale of solar, because, again, it's just not something that we've seen. But there's a lot of information on scale of wind. And the idea is that, like, yeah, community ownership is something that, like, a lot of communities are behind wind turbines when they are locally benefiting, when it's like, they're taking the power from one wind turbine to satisfy their community's needs, right? So there's some of that, I think, certainly at play. The extent to which it shows up for solar is, I wish I had the answer now, but we're working on it. The other thing that I would say is, like, sometimes that's an issue. In some communities, it's not. Like, they see this, again, they see the big projects as an economic development opportunity. A lot of my, like, not my applied work, but my other work is trying to understand why communities respond differently. And a lot of this goes to like how you feel about how this energy infrastructure fits into the landscape. Is in your mind, is that a productive landscape, right? Is energy just another way to make that land productive? And that's where farmers love wind turbines, because this is diversifying their farm income. Or do you see this as a threat? Like, is that landscape really about, and is it an aesthetic value that you're placing on the landscape? And again, even though for solar, it's really a drive-by effect, that is still changing somebody's view potentially from their patio windows. So, Michael.
Yeah, I had I guess a follow-up question to that, and I think you just sort of touch on it. So as far as across the state, looking at zoning ordinances, essentially allowed by right, special land use, or allowing in those land classifications such as agriculture, versus municipal or whatever that looks like. Is there a trend that you see happening? And I guess you just started to touch on that, zoning is really to say, hey, what do you value? Do you value that vision, that line of sight, or do you value, the landowner being able to make their land productive? I guess just wondering, if we were to make recommendations on encouraging zoning, what are some of those items as far as land classifications that you should be thinking about?
So if you're going to make a recommendation on encouraging zoning, what I would recommend is that I think one of the problems is that when communities are reactive, they are reactive to one technology. And this is what I worry about, is they get a wind proposal and they're like, wind is not what we want. Like, we're totally cool with renewable energy, but just not this one. Like, we want solar. And then they get a solar project and they're like, well, actually, we don't really like the impacts that has, right? Like, I think having grown-up conversations about we need energy, right? And these are the technologies. Let's figure out what fits here. In my mind, if Sarah could do that, it would be not having them plan for one technology at a time, but think about all the possible technologies and what fits in their community. That's what I think. When communities are reactive, they've got a solar project proposed. They're not thinking about all of the other things at the same time, and that every energy source has impacts, positive and negative, right? The different local impacts. And so that's what I would say. In terms of trends, we actually it's difficult to, because there's not tons of zoning ordinances for solar, and it's what makes a zoning ordinance restrictive is tougher to suss out for solar than for wind. We looked at wind this summer, and there's actually a political factor for wind in that once you control for population density, places that are more politically conservative tend to be more supported, have laxer regulations for wind, which is exciting finding. And a lot of it, again, my experience has been there's a lot on property rights, and this is compatible. Also, those places tend to be more productive landscapes than communities in Michigan where you have people that are farmers and vacation home owners in the same community. That's where wind is really contentious. And that's also honestly where I think solar is going to be contentious. I
guess one quick follow-up question to that. So making a recommendation along those lines, and now if we're putting it into the context of local units of government and understanding that there are 25% of local units of government up here that do not have planners, how do we frame a recommendation? This will be for the greater task force. I also consider how we put a recommendation around siting together. Does that potentially look at the local planning regions and suggesting to local planning regions that, or to the state, that there should be a specific pot of dollars focused at at energy zoning or master planning or whatever that might be, because without planners, it seems like some of this gets hard to do, and that's where you start to lean on Whoopers, QPAD, Eastern Upper Peninsula regions. I would assume. So I guess to the task force, that would be something. How if we are thinking about recommendations around siting, I think you'd have to include like those planning regions to make it, you know, reasonable.
I think that's 100% right. Like technical assistance is going to be required, in part because there are not staff planners, right? Like and even, you know, there's some jurisdictions that may have planning consultants, but that's expensive. And like, honestly, like having everybody sharing information at the same time, like the facts are the facts. You've got to determine how this fits in your community, but the impacts are the impacts, right? And so I think that there's really an opportunity for some, you know, collaboration there.
All right, I see another hand up. But I don't see who it is. Okay,
Jen,
other questions?
Yeah. Follow up is this is fascinating and amazing. Thank you, Sarah Mills, and all the researchers who put their time into this. This is awesome. A thing that popped into mind to me is also in the UP is our tribal examples and how they're using energy and proactively thinking about it. And the question of, it struck a nerve in particular on the idea of productive landscape versus landscape as aesthetic value versus the indigenous approach on landscape, which is going to take it into another realm entirely, which is a very important conversation to have up here.
Yes, and I mean, Michigan Tech and Michigan State collaboratively have a grant from National Science Foundation to look at that. In part, it's to help rural communities, but particularly they're working with a couple of tribes in the Upper Peninsula on energy plans to think holistically. And I'm really interested in understanding, right, like how renewables fit into the cultural, like spiritual significance that's placed on the landscape. So I think that is, first of all, like that's some work that's ongoing that I'm trying to feed this information, right, to help them a little bit, but I'm learning at the same time. So I think you're absolutely right. And this is from Ann Arbor, right? So this is afar, but kind of understanding the wind proposal that was, you know, in place, kind of, I think it was Baraga, like, and how that was discussed, like the relationship with the neighboring tribe, like I think that really highlighted for me. And there's also some work going on across the country. It's just, you know, about kind of how this fits with on indigenous lands.
All right, great question, Sarah. Wonderful presentation. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to apologize again that we were having technical difficulties, and I know people were coming and going. We, I think, recorded all the content. It looks like make sure to post that. Sarah, I'm sure you're cool with us sharing your slides and, you know, doing any follow-up discussion. So, okay,
absolutely.
Great. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to switch over to public comment. We're just a few minutes behind, but hopefully we can catch up if possible. I know we did get an advance request for public comment by Colleen Goddard. So Colleen, go ahead and get yourself organized and we'll take you off mute in just a second. While Colleen's doing that, and hopefully we've got her with us, looks like we do. I'm going to just ask others that are interested in giving public comment to just understand our guidelines are 3-minute public comment sessions, but we obviously are always interested in additional email feedback and happy to have you at multiple sessions as well. So look forward to the discussion. I also set as a parameter, it's not an opportunity for the task force to answer questions or for presenters to answer questions. So feel free to raise things, but this is not, well, it's for you all to share information with us and to give us your thoughts as opposed to a lot of back and forth. So with that, Colleen, I'm going to ask if you want to take yourself off mute and give you the floor for 3 minutes. Thanks for joining us. Are you
Hello,
there?
can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, sound great.
All right, my name is Colleen Goddard. I'm a community outreach specialist with MISDIG 811. I just wanted to let everybody know that MISDIG does offer a variety of membership options for different Michigan stakeholders. And of course, as most of you I'm sure are already aware, that under Public Act 174, facility owners are required to participate in this state notification center and receive and respond to dig and design tickets. In addition to membership for those required facility owners, MISTIG also offers associate membership options, including land use membership options. And this is what I wanted to talk about, was the land use membership that we offer. Basically, MISTIG uses member codes to manage the delivery of tickets, and most often they do reflect underground facilities. So if a certain member of ours tells us they have facilities in a certain area, they get all the tickets we receive for that area so they can respond and locate their lines in that area. However, MISTIG does also provide support to organizations that need to protect land. A land use code contains a mapped notification area of the location you would like to monitor. So basically, you're monitoring a certain expanse of land. When a MISTIG 811 ticket is placed in these areas, the member is notified. These members range from road agencies with road moratoriums to contaminated landfills. Even some public agencies use land use only codes to protect their right-of-ways for future development. So no one digs in the right-of-way where they plan on having future road developments. A land use only code is a special code on the MISTIG 811 system. It is separate from a member's facilities. So if you're a member, like let's say, for example, UPCO, if UPCO is a member of MISTIG, if they are a member, they also want to have separate land use facility options, they are free to do that. Any tickets received through this code, the land use only code, do not require a positive response and do not need to be located. So once they receive these tickets, as we call them, or these notifications, they don't need to go out and mark any lines on that property. It's just simply for their knowledge to know who's digging in the area of a certain expanse of land. So tickets that overlap a member's land use only code are transmitted to the member, or the member can elect just to go back at different, you can either receive the tickets as they come in, or you can elect to just go in and look at them at your leisure. So it's up to you, up to a land use only member to do it either way. I'm just going to give you a quick example of a land use only membership. It was used to assist members of MISTIG 811 in communicating and tracking work moratoriums that were put in place to protect local hospitals and temporary medical sites during the COVID-19 pandemic. So in certain areas around hospitals or around temporary medical facilities, they were banning digging in those areas just so they wouldn't accidentally hit a line and disrupt any of the hospitals. Does someone have a question? I just heard someone come in. Okay.
No, I think you're good, Colleen, but we're running out of time. If you can just wrap it up.
All right. So basically, I'll just give you a name and number that you can contact, name and number that, so in case you have any questions or you're interested in it, you can contact us at membersupport@mistig811.org, or you can call them directly at 800-482-7161. That's for a member support team. They can help walk you through this if it's something you're interested in.
Great.
That's it. You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Other public comments for today. I'm just checking my email to see if Kimber sent anything over. It doesn't look like we have anyone else who wants to address the task force. We got hands up. Good job, everybody. Way to use the technology. Okay. Who do I have? Okay, I've got two, Rosemary Greyer and Don Lee. Rosemary, well, how about you be up first, and then Don, you're on deck. So Rosemary, why don't you take yourself off mute? And once you introduce yourself, I'll go ahead and start the timer.
Okay, am I on?
You sound great, Rosemary. Floor is yours.
Excuse me for the background noise. I am a little concerned about, the big picture of electrification plan that you've been talking about. And it seems like it's maybe a three-part plan where for the renewable energy, you have the wind turbines and solar panels and the electric cars being made by companies. And then the state now is coming in to kind of develop a plan to use these renewables. And then the third part of it would be the spent resources. So I haven't heard, I don't think it's been part of a conversation that the task force has had at this point. But what would be the future of the spent resources regarding like the old batteries from electric vehicles, for instance, or the spent solar panels and that kind of material? Where do they go? Would each local community be assisted in their local salvage yard to have best practices for disposing things safely? So I guess I'm wondering if the task force then, if they're, and I would encourage them to take a look at that if you haven't already. I don't think it's a problem necessarily for the task force to solve, but maybe just include it as part of the infrastructure that I feel it needs to be in there. So if that could be considered, I'll look forward to hearing some discussion on it in future meetings.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rosemary.
Mhm.
Okay, and now I'm gonna ask Don Lee, who had his hand up. Don, if you wanna unmute yourself, and then you can have 3 minutes. Love to hear from you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Sound great. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Don Lee. I'm a PhD student at Michigan Tech in the Environmental and Energy Policy program. And first, I want to say thanks to all of you for this important work on energy challenges that the UP and UP ratepayers are facing. I just purchased a home in Houghton, and I really love it here, but I really am concerned about the energy future of the Upper Peninsula. And with that being said, I just have a couple quick comments. First, I'm interested to hear what the director's vision of the UP-wide resource planning effort would look like. So I'll be following that closely. I think that's a very interesting tool that could be used to move things forward up here. And secondly, in response to an early comment by Mike, and I missed his last name, unfortunately, regarding the impacts of decreasing demand, increasing price, and vice versa, it kind of caused me to think that instead of trying to fit RE implementation into existing energy business and regulatory models, that there's a need to restructure these models to reflect the difference in the lack of fuel costs and generation, distribution, and the use of renewables. And I realize that this might be outside the scope of the task force. Excuse me, but it seems to be a necessary component, and I'd like to hear comments on this, or if this is something that's already been considered by the task. And that's all I have.
Awesome. Thank you, Don. Good points. And definitely things we're thinking about. Okay, let me see if I've got anything else. I don't think I do. It looks like those are all the comments we have for today. So I'm going to ask everybody to mute themselves because it looks like somebody's watering their plants. Okay. So task force members, in our just last 5 minutes here, I just want to check in. I know that we had some early discussion here today, and we've laid out a variety of things that might be useful for future presentations. And I'm just wanting to kind of open it back up for a couple of minutes of comments and just see if any new ideas may have cropped up that anybody wants to put on the table to make sure that it's influences agenda planning. Let me also say too, always happy to have additional conversations, certainly around agenda. If you have thoughts in the middle of the night that you want to offer up, just email them. Don't call me in the middle of the night. Any additional thoughts from task force members about presentations they think will be helpful to build us towards recommendations?
I would just like to re-ask about the financing piece, potentially on the green bank and so on. I think you know, what Dan had laid out, I think would make sense, especially in the scope of siting and, you know, cost of capital for communities.
One, financing. Thanks, Michael. Other thoughts? All right, well, I took a lot of notes and I know others did too. So hopefully we've captured thinking for future agendas. So thanks again for the discussions here today. So just want to remind folks that the website is up to date. So UP Energy Task Force, michigan.gov/UP Energy Task Force. So you'll be able to find meeting materials, recordings, presentations. And always we have our email box, which is a very complicated eagle-UPenergy@michigan.gov. So hopefully you can find us there if necessary. And we'll be posting materials going forward on the website as well. So with that, I'm just going to say thanks to everybody for putting up with me not feeling 100%. Hopefully we did okay throughout the day. I think it was a good series of presentations and conversations. I really appreciate the input, and we'll get together again soon. So with that, thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Feel better, Lisa.
Thanks.
Thank you.